Welcome again. We are going to have now the official opening. I will ask to the floor, to the computer, our Vice Director, Professor Jorge Costa.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, estimated colleagues and friends, in the name of the Rector of ISCTE, Professora Maria de Lourdes Rodrigues, it is my honor and heartfelt enthusiasm that I welcome you all to Lisbon and to ISCTE for this 16th International Sustainability Transition Conference, IST'25. We are honored to host this pivotal gathering of scholars, practitioners and change makers from around the world, united by the shared commitment to advance sustainability transition. This year's theme, tensions and trade-offs in structural changes for sustainability transitions, could not be more timely and more urgent. We met at a crucial junction. 1 decade after the Paris Agreement, the world finds itself grappling with the intensifying consequences of climate change. The average global temperature has already surpassed 1.5 degrees, and its impact, heat waves, droughts, storms, are no longer distant projections, but unfortunately, are daily realities. At the same time, we face geopolitical instability, energy insecurity, and a regression in progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. These challenges underscore a central truth. Structural change is not an option. Structural change, it is essential. But as this year's theme reminds us, such change is never simple. It is fraught with tensions between speed and depth, between equity and efficiency, between innovation and inclusion. These are not just technical dilemmas. These are deeply social, political, and institutional measurements. At ISCTE, in particular to our research center, DINÂMIA'CET, we are deeply engaged in exploring these complexities. We believe that universities must not only generate knowledge, but also serve as platforms for dialogue, experimentation, transformation. Hosting IST'25 reflects that commitment. Over the coming days, we will hear from leading voices in the field, engage in critical debates, and explore new pathways for actions. I encourage you to embrace the tensions, challenge the assumptions, and build bridges across disciplinary and perspectives. Let this be a space not only for reflection, but for co-creation. Let me also take a moment to thank the Sustainability Transition Research Network, our organizing committee, and all the volunteers and staff who have worked tirelessly to make this conference possible. I would also like to thank our partners, institutions, and organization. IGOT from the University of Lisbon, and the National Laboratory for Energy and Geology, LANEG. And of course, thank you for each of you for your presence, your passion, and your contributions to this vital field. In this conference edition, we can count more than 500 participants. As we have noticed, we have a full house here. And those are from more than 50 different countries. Together, let us rise to the challenge of our time. Let us navigate the tensions, embrace the trade-offs, and accelerate the transition that our planet, our society so urgently needs. Welcome to IST'25, welcome to Lisbon, welcome to ISCTE. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jorge Costa. Now, as Professor Paulo Tormenta, Representative Director of DINÂMIA'CET.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to compliment the organization, particularly my colleague Nuno Bento, for this amazing organization. It's incredible to see this auditorium full of people interested in this issue about the sustainability transition. So in the behalf of DINÂMIA'CET Research Center, I would like to warmly welcome all participants in the 16th International Sustainability Transition Conference 2025, dedicated to the theme Tensions and Trade-offs of Structural Changes for Sustainability Transitions. It is a great honor to host the Sustainability Transitions Research Network here at ISCTE. This conference takes place amid growing climate urgency as global temperatures surpassed 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2024 and climate impacts continue to worsen. Despite significant advances in renewable energy and electric mobility, global emissions remain high and progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals is slowing down. Geopolitical instability and weakening climate commitments, including a potential US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, further complicate efforts to tackle the climate crisis. Portugal has been recognized as one of the most ambitious countries in the European Union on these issues. Its main target under 2016 Paris Agreement have focused on achieving carbon neutrality, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and pursuing a sustainable energy transition. Our research center has identified ecological and digital transition as its main specific research priority for 2025-2029 periods, aiming to study the complexity of socio-economic and territorial change linked to the challenge posed by transition processes. I hope that over these 3 days, we can elevate the discourse on sustainability transitions, setting clear goals for the evolution of both society and academia in this field. So I wish you all a productive and inspiring conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Paulo Tormenta. And now I will ask to the computer, Florian Kern, the director of the STRN network. Yeah, it's here.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see so many of you here. We've filled this auditorium, and on behalf of the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, I'd very much like to welcome you. We started from humble beginning. In 2009, we held the first IST conference in Amsterdam. I think there was about 120 people there, and it's amazing to see the size of this community and the vibrancy of it still going strong after so many years. We're aiming to be open to anyone who is interested. We're aiming to bridge north-south and east-west gaps and become a more global network. Many of you will know that there are many Dutch scholars still around, which we just had a session where about 90% of the audience we felt was Dutch. But we have made strides in being a more global community. There are more things to be done there, but we are striving to be an open, inclusive, and accessible community to people from all around the world. Obviously, this IST conferences, these annual conferences are the flagship event that the network is organizing. But around the conference, and there's many other things we're doing. So we're building this global community. We have more than 3,500 members globally now from 80 different countries. We have a dedicated website, a newsletter to keep up to date with one another. We have a dedicated scientific journal, Environmental Innovation and Societal Transitions, which was founded by members of our community, and which is a key venue for our academic debates. The impact factors have just been published, has gone up again, so we're very proud of what we've achieved here as a community. Of course, the editorial team, but also all of you as authors and reviewers, and so on and so forth. So that's also something to be proud of and something we want to continue. So do submit your best conference papers that you've presented here, on which you hopefully get very useful feedback, to the journal. The track organizers, you're welcome to submit special issue proposals and so on and so forth. Let's keep that going strong. Policy outreach is obviously also one of our priorities. There's a new working group that takes this challenge very seriously. They're planning a dialogue session on Thursday, so please do come along to this dialogue session if you're interested in shaping the way STRN is engaging with the science policy interface. And of course, there's many things going on also for early career researchers. We've built a PhD school, a method school. There's an own NEST conference annually, so a lot of activities that you can get involved with. Just a quick word about the governance. So you've just seen probably by the mailing list that we've had a call for members of the steering group, which is really the body that steers and develops this network further, develops it through projects. You see a lot of names and faces here, and you'll find many of these in the room here. So do approach us throughout the conference with your ideas about how you want to see the network develop in the future. And then out of the steering group, we elect a board. The fellow board members, Katharina Schill and Wouter Boone, sit down here. My name is Florian Körner, I'm the current chair. And then we have a secretariat based at Utrecht University, with Adrian, for example, is here, who are very important in supporting all the activities of the network. We are very grateful to a number of institutional members who enable this with their generous funding, without which it would be difficult to organize this size of a community with that many different activities throughout the year. So we're very grateful for these funders. And I want to get to the conference, the theme, the keynote now. So if this sounds of interest to you, do sign up to the newsletter, do become involved in one of the new thematic groups, engage with us on social media, have a great conference. I hope you have a stimulating experience. Come back next year in IST 2026. And if you're interested at all, also talk to us about institutional membership of your places. One last thing I wanted to share, that we, as many other academic communities, have been on Twitter for a long time, as it was then called. You will all know that this is an increasingly very toxic platform, which we will avoid from now onwards. So we have now made this move to Blue Sky. So do scan the code and do join us for a more decent conversation about the things that are core to our mission on this platform rather than elsewhere. So thank you very much and have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Florian. And now I'm the last one to give the opening of this 2025 conference. First and foremost, welcome. Welcome to Lisbon, welcome to ISCTE, as was said by my esteemed colleagues. And I would like to show you the places where you are coming from. So this year we have over 520 participants from more than 50 countries. I'm happy to constate that the network has expanded. So there's not only people from Central Europe and the Nordic countries, of course, and England. We have more and more people from the Southern Europe. We have also people, a lot of people from North America, from South America, from Australia, from Asia, Middle East as well, and also from Africa. So it's the way it develops. It's very interesting and representative. So that's really something interesting. I would like to ask a question to you, to all of you. Do you think that transitions right now Are transitions accelerating, are just stagnating, or are going back? What do you think? Who thinks that transitions are accelerating right now? Okay. Going back now? It's half, and stagnating? Well, I would say that is a third, maybe a bit more for acceleration. Okay, so I did some type of calculation in order to see whether the transitions in the past 15 years have been accelerating or stagnating. So this graph shows you the percentage of countries that are increasing the share of renewables in total final consumption. Why total final consumption, not primary energy? Because if you take final consumption is better because you are closer to the actual services delivered, and you don't go into some protocols of efficiency that can change artificially the share. So it's a good indicator. And this graph shows you the number of countries, in a year-on-year basis, that have increased from these 51 countries in the sample. The number of countries that have increased the share of renewables. As you can see, if this number is above 50%, we can consider that is generally accelerating. So after the Paris Agreement, it's interesting that it has been an acceleration, a clear acceleration up to 2020. And then, of course, the pandemics came, and apparently we are still accelerating for the last year that we have, 2022. But this is for the number of countries. If you take in terms of the consumption of countries, so if you weight that by the consumption, you will see that it's not that rosy. So in the beginning, perhaps the acceleration crowd was right, but people that doubted are also right, because if you consider in terms of the sharing consumption, actually it's not accelerating. We are below the 50%. And why that? This is mostly because of these three suspicious guys. This is because of, if you take China, USA, and India out of this analysis, you do see that the rest of the countries, both in terms of number or in terms of number weighted by their consumption, they actually are increasing the share of renewables. That means, by the way, that you have more electrification, more renewables, so lots of other things that we are studying. And this means that actually we have also a problem with these three big nations that represent a big part on the energy consumption. All this to show you that right now we are in the middle of an uncertain period, and so I think it's very timely to study the tensions and conflicts and the trade-offs with the transition. So for the conference we have 11 tracks. It was really nice and interesting to kind of organize the way that we created these tracks. It was open, so lots of you submitted proposals for the tracks. They went on revision. A couple of them were retained, so we have these 11 tracks, or 10 tracks plus the other one. As you can see, we have teams on justice, multi-system interactions, actors, discontinuation, geography, urban, civil society, of course. And we have also 26 special and extra sessions in a huge amount of issues. So you will find on urban transformation, on trade, on finance. So it's a very, let's say, eclectic way of starting to analyze all these uncertainties and complexities. So yeah, and final word for the team. So here you can see the organizing committee at ISCTE, IGOT, and Leneg, and also Alexandra, who is working from University of Aveiro, but she's also part of our committee. As some of you know, a lot of people know in this community, by the way. Our staff coordination, if you have not seen them, so Tristão and Dalia. Of course, if you have questions, you can refer to them or to all other people in the staff. And some special thanks to Frank. Where is Frank? Oh, there's Frank. Special thanks to Frank because the team of the conference this year actually went through lots of back and forwards. We discussed a lot, and I think maybe because also I organized, but then you can judge. This is a very timely issue right now. Perhaps it was not that visible or it was not that obvious 1 year ago. So with Frank, we had a productive discussion in order to, find this good setting for the discussions. To Taran, I would like also to thank Taran and Tuka and Marcos. By the way, it's not here the picture, but it's here in person, because actually we learned a lot with institutional memory from the IST last year. And you helped a lot the organization of this year, so thank you very much. And finally, to Adrian and Florian and the network, so I'm just nomming Adrian and Florian, but the idea is also to extend to the network by helping us to organize this conference. So to them, thank you very much. 2 notes to end the opening. So you will have a QR code with documents where you can find a more friendly way to see the schedule with the rooms and everything, for instance, and other documents, the book of papers, the book of abstracts. And you will find at the end of the day a description to get to the circuits tomorrow. And I think that's all for the notes, I think that's all. Now, I'm happy to introduce our first keynote of the conference. This keynote is someone who has been working on topics related with what we do in a different perspective, more in a long-term perspective, also looking at the technology dynamics, at the economics dynamics, at some social dynamics as well. And has accumulated lots of experience in these domains, in these fields that I think are transversal to lots of ideas and topics that you are working. And it's a great honor to have here Nebojsa Nakicenovic. Thank you very much. Is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Nuno, for the kind introduction. Let me just say first that I'm absolutely delighted to join this conference of the transitions community. To be honest, for me, it's a little bit like homecoming. I'm also always like to be in Portugal, but it is a homecoming because in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, I did work on the innovation diffusion in the broader social context. I mean, just think about the abolishment of slavery that took many, many decades, and it was a fundamental change of our culture, fundamental change of our values, and so on. But during the last 20, 30 years, I focused more on scenario development, on the international assessment, such as IPCC or global energy assessment, and also on the policy advice. So I'm really appreciate the invitation, and it's wonderful to see that the transitions community is really so large that so many of you are here. So let me start my introductory comments by showing you a synthetic picture of the planet, and I hope you can see it. I mean, the reason why it's synthetic is that there are no clouds, there are no lightnings, and it's all at night. But I think it shows the telltale sign of humanity. The nighttime lights. On the left, you see Europe. On the right, you see Japan. Very strong lights. This is something that shows that one species, humanity, in the Anthropocene, dominates the global processes. It's a proxy for energy, it's a proxy for where the urban settlements are, and it's also a proxy for insults and pressures, ever-increasing pressures on the environment. So that's really our challenge, and this is why sustainability transition is so important. And I would argue that these are basically the two phases of the Anthropocene. Huge development and success, at the same time leaving over 1 billion people behind, probably 2 billion, depending how you measure it, who do not have either affordable or any access to electricity, for example. Here you can see the enormous luminosity of US at the bottom, and the North Pole. It's a little bit of a different picture of the Earth, but it doesn't look like this anymore. The summer ice is melting in the North Pole, Greenland is threatened, and so in any case, the point is that there are these two phases, great success, and at the same time, huge pressures on the Earth system. And this is why the fundamental deep transition is really required. So that's basically will be the topic of my introductory talk. And basically, I have divided it into 5 parts, during the next 40 minutes or so, I will go through them one by one. So let's first focus on Holocene, from the transition from the Holocene to the great acceleration, and I believe we are still in this period. So what you see here in the graph I borrowed from Johan Rockström. Well, first of all, on the top left corner, the history of the planet altogether, that was formed about 4.5 billion years ago, and then life started really 1 billion years later, and on top of that, the symbol, in my view, one of the symbols of the Anthropocene, a pickup truck, the motorization of the world. And what you see here in the 3 panels is actually the history of the climate. On the far left panel is climate over the last 500,000 years. And you see here the variation between the glacial and interglacial periods that lasted on the order of about 120, 140,000 years each. Please note that the scale on the left shows the degrees Celsius change. It's about 5 degrees change between Earth being ice wall and the hot Earth during the interglacials. In the middle is the Holocene, or beginning of the Holocene from the last ice age. You can see incredibly fast warming on geological scale. And the last 11,700 years, you see the oscillation in the middle of the temperature, but notice please how constant it is. The variation is about 0.5 degree, maximum 1 degree. And I think that explains to a large extent why we were able to settle down, develop agriculture, early civilizations through the Neolithic Revolution. And then on the right side, our huge challenge and challenge for our next generations is from the Holocene, from the very nice Mother Earth relationship to humans, we are starting to increase the temperature. And this is a little bit old. In fact, last year, the temperature increase was 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial. And that's the lower range of the Paris Agreement. So we are there already in the lower range. And we are very likely to exceed 2 degrees over the future. So this is our challenge. I just wanted to start with that. This is the major challenge facing us. Looking more in the details, you can see here annual fluctuations of the global mean temperature since the industrialization started. Note that in the 40s and in the 50s, we actually had even a slight cooling. And I believe that a lot had to do with the emission of the aerosols and the air pollution. But at that time, it was already clear that if the trends continue, the warming will start. And there were lots of papers in the peer-reviewed literature. We at IASA also developed future scenarios and looked at them. We had one that would be warming as the historical warming happened. That was the high scenario. But you also had a low scenario that stabilized the climate at 0.8 degrees. So that's gone. That possibility is gone. Now you can see major developments, establishment of the IPCC, Kyoto Protocol, and then the Paris Agreement, all really important, but I don't want to be too cynical, but if you look, the climate was not impressed the climate system. In fact, if anything, during the last decade, the warming has increased, and we do not fully understand all of the reasons why that increase took place. So that's our predicament. And this is just one sign. This is from an iconic paper from late Will Steffen and colleagues from a few years ago that showed in the orange on the left various areas of human activity, how they accelerated. This is why the word great acceleration during the last half a century. And on the right are the impacts on the Earth system in blue, shown in blue. So I will not go through them, but let me just say on top left panel, we have population. That's really important, 8 billion people today. On the right, we start with the carbon dioxide, so I will just mention those two quickly to give you an impression. So this is the one way of showing the population increase in the world. First, we had hunters and gatherers, probably well less than 12 million on the planet, and few claimed that we were close to extinction in a number of times. Then the Neolithic Revolution, I mentioned, that accelerated humanity to about 800 million. So it's a 100-fold increase. And then Industrial Age, another 10-fold increase to 8 billion. Now, we don't know how the future will look like. Let's hope that there will be a transition to sustainable Anthropocene, meaning maybe less than today, 5 billion, 6 billion. These are some of the lowest scenarios in the literature. But it can be also a 50% increase in the global population, making the whole problem even tougher to challenge. But not that the low population is easy either. It means aging and many other things. So this is, I think, one way of looking at this great acceleration. The other one are the emissions. This is from my colleagues in the Global Carbon Project. I had the great privilege of chairing it for many years. And what you can see here is that the COVID is visible, the decline in emissions. That means we can reduce the emissions if there is a strong push in that direction. But unfortunately, we went back to the historical trend, so they're increasing at about 1% per year. And there is no slowing in sight, despite Nuno's figure of increase in the electricity, which is great news. But still, I would argue emissions are increasing, and this is why the transition is so important. So the next thing I would like to talk a little bit is as you can already see, I'm arguing that there is a paradox here. We have progress on one side, we have interlaced with crisis, but we also have emergent inequality in the world. So it is not all glorious, and I think as many of you know. So I would argue that the world is at important crossroads. And this is why there is a chance and opportunity for the transition, in my view, for a fundamental, deep transition. Because these enormous challenges offer opportunities as well. I mean, there is a Chinese proverb saying that in every crisis there is an opportunity, and I think this is the case. And perhaps we can that way achieve sustainable future for all, meaning safe and just on this planet. And the reason is that we actually did in the past move in that direction. If you look, since 1800, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, global economy increased about 100 times. That depends how you measure it, but 100 times is really impressive, given that the global population increased about 10 times. Now, the energy increased 50 times, which one can also interpret as semi-good news, meaning we are becoming more efficient. But at the same time, CO2 emissions increased about 30 times, and that's one of our central Earth system pressures. So the temperature already mentioned increased on average about 1.5 degrees last year. But there are so many other things. Let me just mention that there are 8 million people who die prematurely every year from the air pollution. And if we deal with air pollution, there are potential synergies also for dealing with the energy, for example, to the renewables. So this is a huge chance and a paradox in many ways, that we've achieved a lot, and yet we are transgressing many of the planetary boundaries. And this is why I was always really impressed since 2015 about the aspirational goals of the 2030 agenda with the 17 SDGs. This is why we started the activity called The World in 2050. The Paris Agreement in the same year. A little bit later on, the European Green Deal, and I hope that European Green Deal doesn't become just European productivity and competitiveness deal, that it also focuses on human development. And unfortunately, it's a 10th year anniversary of Paris and the 2030 agenda, and we have achieved something, a little bit, but by far not enough. And there are only 5 years left, and this is why we called our activity The World in 2050. But hopefully by 2050, it will look a little bit different. So let me just show you two pictures of this paradox. So this is about 2.5 billion people in the world, and who do not have sustainable cooking fuels. And this is how some of the huts look like, full of smoke. This means children and women suffer a lot. These are the 4 million people who die prematurely, that's estimated. So that's one dimension. The other one you could consider as really great news. Everybody in the world has a mobile phone. Perhaps some of you have 2 or 3 with you here, but everybody in the world has a mobile phone, including 1 billion people or so that either cannot afford and do not have access to electricity. So how do they charge the phones? I mean, here's the picture. Because this is so important, mobile phone was a revolutionary change. I mean, a major transition in our behavior and the way we work and so on. So this is the problem, lack of electricity. People are innovative. These are some of the students studying under nighttime lights because there is no light at home. So this is, I think this is the major challenge, is this incredible inequality in the world. And let me show you maybe the perhaps most impressive and depressive at the same time indication of the inequality in the world. On the horizontal scale is the Gini coefficient. Those of you who are not familiar with it, on the left, 0 means perfect equality. On the right, 1 means perfect inequality. And here is a curve in the middle for a number of countries. The vertical scale indicates the income of the children as a function of the income of the parents, so the cross-generational elasticity in income. Now, you can see that the Nordic countries are great. They're moving in the right direction. The whole world needs to move in the right direction. But United States, and you might not be surprised, is moving in the opposite direction with many parts of the world. So that's our challenge, that inequality is actually increasing in the world. And this is why the transition, again, this is why the transition is so important. Now, I think based on the historical dynamics of change and the learning processes that we have behind us, also during the Neolithic Revolution, but in particular during the Industrial Revolution, I think can give us lots of hope for the way forward. So let me start here. Transformational change, and I'll just, I'm making I'm stating many what one can call stylized facts. Hungarian-American economist Kaldor said, when you talk about complex things, you should use stylized facts. That means they're not wrong, but it's approximately right in every case. And maybe another quote that's attributed to Einstein goes in the same direction, that one should express complex things as simple as possible, but then comes a caveat, not simpler than that. So let's see how I succeed. But in any case, so I'm borrowing this from Schumpeter. Basically, the transformational change is dynamic, it's cumulative, it's systemic, but it's also very deeply uncertain, and the direction is not always known. And I would argue, again, this is stylized, that there are 2 modes of change. One is incremental, gradual improvements that we are all familiar with. From day to day, many things improve. Mobile phones become better and so on. But there is an abrupt, radical, discontinued change that he called gales of creative destruction. This is where the system fundamentally changes. Everything changes, including our values and behaviors. The whole society changes. And I think this is well illustrated with a quote from Schumpeter. And he said that one can add as many male coaches as one pleases. One will never get a railway by doing so. This indicates the really fundamental change. And the picture shows Stockton-Darlington Railway from 200 years ago, pretty much exactly. And that was the beginning of that revolution. That was, whole complex human activities and technologies and new economics. It was an age of coal, age of steam, age of steel, textiles, and so on. So this is the kind of fundamental transition we are talking about. at least that I'm referring to. But don't think that the old technology stood there and just watched what's happening. This is the prices, the cost of taking a stagecoach compared below to the cost of riding on the railways. And you can see this continuity in between the two. At the beginning, railways were not all that great. They were slow and they were exploding. Locomotives were exploding all over the place and derailing and so on. But notice how big the improvement was on the stale coaches. Just one example, they replaced leather bearings in the axles with the iron bearings and whale oil lubrication. That improved the coaches really enormously. So the point is that the old technology and the old systems, the old economic structures do not stand still under the pressure of the niche innovation, which in this case were the railways. The next example, and one of my favorite pictures altogether, if I may admit. So on the left, you see the Easter parade on the Fifth Avenue in New York City, 1900. And you can ask the question, where is the car? I'm sure you cannot see it because the resolution is not good. But believe me, there is a car there in 1900. I don't know whether it was steam or electric or internal combustion, but there is a car there. But then look 13 years later. Only automobiles. And so this shows that there where the importance was very high, I mean, manure in the cities, accidents through the horse carriages, this was all an incredible nuisance that brought the system into crisis. They were replaced by motor vehicles that today are a major problem, but back then was a solution to many of the problems. In 13 years, but if one looks at the US in general, in US, the horses disappeared from the streets in about 30 years. And if you look at many other historical examples, whether it's UK, whether it's European countries, China, and so on, 30 years is a good order of magnitude for the replacement of systems that are granular, that are very close to the consumer. And I think automobiles are a great example of that. Here's an example from the UK, just to show you. It took 30 years, just like in US. Also later on, the rolling stock of the railways also took about 30 years to replace. So who knows? I mean, we have the advent of electric mobility. Perhaps in 30 years, everybody will more or less have electric cars. So it will take time, but in some countries, yesterday was an example of Norway where most of the new cars are electric, but not the whole fleet. That's why it takes about 30 years. So these are some of the examples. Let me give you another example that I think amplifies some of the points I'm trying to make. Now, I don't want to project too much of a technological image, but this is something that we can count and present. Always think about it. This is a larger system that we are talking about. So below are the piston engines. That means a symbol for the aircraft in general, how they improved, and you can see very typical S-shaped curve. But it accumulated close to the Second World War. Really accumulated because this aircraft came to the edge of the potential performance because there was a need to fly ever higher, ever faster, and the higher you fly, the less bite the propeller has, and it's limited by the speed of sound. So to make a long story short, to fly higher and fly faster, you need a new technology. And on the top left is the diffusion of jet engines, and many people associate that with the Messerschmitt. MA-262 that was introduced during the Second World War, but due to Hitler, it was luckily not used for its best purpose. But the point I was trying to make, that's not true. This is not the real transition that occurred. On the right is a Caprioni aircraft from Italy, and there have been the same similar designs in Russia and everywhere in the world. It's a hybrid system. So here, compressor is run by an engine, by internal combustion engine, and you have a jet in the back. So it's called motor jet. And I think very often we see that in our systems, that the transition, niche, innovation compared to the old is not always clear. It's very often very ambiguous. This is why I think when you're in the middle of the process, it's not really clear in which direction it's going to go. And today we have many plug-in hybrids. And sailing ships, also the same thing. When steam propulsion came, many of the sailing ships had also introduced steam engine to compete with the steamers. And here is an example that I like a lot. It's a design called Progress Eagle, a plane that might be around the next decade, fully sustainable, full electric aeroplane with a hydrogen fuel cell for takeoff. Otherwise, it's plastered with the photovoltaic cells. And you can see it has a very biological design. So there is hope that even one of the sectors that will be most difficult to change, that we have designs. And by the way, there are electric aeroplanes today already that you can take, but they're small, 8 passengers or so. And this was, I think, the reason why I brought the example of the aircraft that we studied a long time ago, is that this was the first example, I think, where it was empirically shown that we learn in gradular systems. The more we do, the more we learn. And this is from the famous paper shown in particular during the Second World War, assembly hours per aircraft. And the more aircraft one builds, the more cumulative number, the lower are the number of hours, which means lower are the costs and the service. And so this is one of the really important ways how the technology, the niche innovation, actually can threaten the old systems, because the old systems have a very limited improvement potential. Now, here is an example. I'm back to the mobile phones. I really love this example because if you think of the automobiles before and the railways, so these are a number of people who have a mobile phone, a digital phone that replaced the copper wire phone. In the OECD countries, very swift process, 30 years. In 30 years, essentially everybody had a digital phone. But not only that, look at the Global South. So Global South and Global North, in this case, went in unison. So this is the power of granularity. I call it here disruptive granularity, because it can happen very, very quickly. And here is the first phone, the first digital phone from Motorola, affectionately called the Brick. I actually have one in my private museum. So this is kind of advance of the new age. I was going to bring it along, but as you know, it's forbidden to put batteries in your check-in luggage, and it's too heavy, too heavy. So, in any case, so you can see this is about a 30-year process, very similar to the automobiles. So I'm not claiming this is a generic rule, but the point is that innovation niche of gradual systems can fundamentally change our society, our behaviors, and it is actually our behaviors that change the nature of the service as well. And this is an example from Charlie Wilson and my colleagues at IASA. Nuno, I think, was also author of this paper. It shows this power of granularity. I'm trying to make this argument all the way through. So on the left, you see the learning rate of a number of technologies without going into the detail, and then you have the unit size, and you can see that the cost decrease as the increase in the number of units. On the right, though, is what the authors called true learning, and I tend to agree with that. If you subtract, if you descale the economies of scale from the costs in the technologies on the right, you get actually the learning in the granular systems. And as you can see, I've put the 2 blue arrows. You can see that the improvement is significantly larger. So I think this is really important for what I would try to say in the rest of my 15 minutes or whatever I have left now. So the next point is I would like to argue that innovation and diffusion are a social process. In fact, people very often think about techno-economic paradigms and so on. I don't disagree with that, but all I'm saying is this is not independent of us. This is part of our society. It's part of us. So I think we also always have to think about behaviors, about the legal arrangements, and so on. And one, I think, of the big social reflections on the on the niche innovations is also a position, not just the opportunity. And going back to one of my favorite topics, introduction of the railways, there you can find many pictures like that. As I said before, I mean, railways were very dangerous, so it's not surprising that the people were scared of railways. And by the way, railways were faster than horseback. So you need to develop telegraph. Without the telegraph, there are no railways because you couldn't coordinate the schedules of the railways. So the point is that it's always a cluster of systems that unite and in some ways not only have trade-offs as a part of our title of the conference, but also huge synergies. I would like to put emphasis on the synergies. I think this is really important. But in general, I think there is a resistance to change. I think it arises from this kind of uncertainty. It arises from this disruption of our very livelihoods through the through the niche innovations, and perhaps, threatens the identity and status of those who are dominant in the society. But there is also something that's called in the literature sailing ship effect, and I've tried to allude to that all the way through, is that when a new technology comes or a new system, the niche innovation, the old one does not stand still. They try to improve. So the clippers were a huge improvement of the sailing ships. And then on top of it, many of them introduced steam technology. So that is another mechanism that delays the diffusion of the niche innovations. And then there are issues like lock-in, path dependence, and so on, that I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. I mean, just think about the skills you need in the digital age compared to the skills that we needed in the pre-digital, in the analog change. So these are some of the big challenges ahead of us. Oops. I had this graphic. I tried to here just reinterpret the seminal paper from Johan and Laur. Just on the graph on the left, try to illustrate these various phases from niche innovation all the way to the regime destabilization of the old system and the emergence as a dominant paradigm of the new system. So this is very schematic. And then on the right, that I wanted to make important point that I think is done in that paper and the earlier work from Frank and others, that you have various dimensions of this fundamental transition: social, institutional, economic. You could add governance, legal dimensions, and so on. I will not go into the details, but the point is that this is really a fundamental change in our societies rather than something that's sporadic. And I think that explains perhaps also the slow transition from the old to the new. By the way, I almost said transformation, and maybe I should make one point, at least on the personal level. Very often transition and transformation are used as synonyms. That's fine. That's fine with me. But in my own dictionary, I do find a distinction. I think transition is from one phase to the next phase. So I think correctly, transition is from today to a sustainable future for all. That's a transition. But I think transformation, some claim, is more fundamental than transition. But I think more important difference is that transformation is more open. We don't know where we are going to end up. Who knows how the system would look like? Also, current system is not homogeneous. And this is why I wanted to show Frank's iconic figure that has many manifestations that I don't need to explain here, and I will not do a good job. I'm looking forward to the panel tomorrow, but the point is, this is being replaced everywhere. I took this one from the ResearchGate. There are so many papers. So, there is also some good news. Some ideas are spreading, like a virus. So perhaps this is a pre-sign that the world will be changing. But I think there are also fundamental changes that are occurring also spontaneously from generation to generation. Again, work of my colleagues, Nuno, who sits down there, and Arnov. They looked into one of the really big changes in the let's call it those post-motorization society. What you see in yellow is a total number of people who have a driver's license in Sweden. And the dashed line shows that for the age group of 18 to 19. So you can see that many of the young people do decide not to have a driver's license. Maybe the leveling off is more associated with the fact that perhaps people have to rent a car from time to time. Car sharing, I think, is one of the very important innovations. And then you see the same thing for Stockholm. In the urban areas, you don't need a car as much as you need it in the countryside. So these are kind of fundamental transformations and transitions that are occurring in the society that I think allow the niche innovations to spread and diffuse. So let me now come in the next 10 minutes to the last part of my talk about how could one imagine the occurrence or the appearance or the destruction of the old through the emergence of the new that would be hopefully safe, just, and I also wanted to add beautiful. We always forget about that. We always talk about many other things, but beauty is really important in my view. And so this is how I imagine it. I'll just try to explain it very briefly. On the horizontal scale, think of human well-being, and on the vertical scale, provision of self-service like mobility or telecommunication and so on. Now, in the UN system, usually we talk about the need to fulfill basic needs for everybody: water, food, healthy food, clean, drinkable water, affordable energy, and so on. Yes, absolutely. But I would argue this is not good enough. I mean, we need a decent level, and there is a community in EDITS working on the decent access in the EDITS community. Lots of publications in that area, so I'm just paraphrasing what's there. But there is the other thing that's much more controversial. Many of us, in particular the rich, the exceedingly affluent, overconsume and overwaste. And so, I put a picture of the carpenter's carpenter's clip to we need to increase the bottom and decrease the top in order to achieve this safe and sustainable future for all. And I would like to argue here, this is a change in the ethics. It's the change in new morality, new norms, and so on. So this kind of fundamental change is a part of this process. Now, there is, I think, one of the new ideas in Europe that I welcome very much is the new European Bauhaus, and I don't know if some of you have seen it, the red brick building at the entrance here to the campus. If I'm not wrong, Nuno, that used to be car registration office, not very sustainable as most of them are. And it has been rebuilt, recycled, reused, and if you go there, it's wonderful, at least from my perspective. So the new European Bauhaus is a way of thinking of sustainable, inclusive, and also beautiful. I participated in the Nexus report on the Bauhaus for the European Commission, and I also think that this is good news because it's nature-based. It shows how we can redesign our urban areas. And I'm thinking about human tragedy in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Gaza. This all needs to be rebuilt. I hope somebody will have the sense of using some of these ideas of rebuilding there for the common future of all. And we have in the World in 2050 initiative thought of the 6 major transformations that need to be seen together. That's the point I would like to make. I will not go through them, through the detail, but it has to do with us, with education, Medicare, with consumption, production, circular systems, decarbonization, healthy food, less pressure on the planet. People are moving to the cities. They're like gravity wells, so we have to really think. This is why Bauhaus is so important. And then there is a digital revolution, and here we argue that we need synergetic approach for all of those, and you can restructure that. It can be also 7 or 10 transformations, but I think 6 is a good number because everybody can remember. In contrast to 17 SDGs, I bet that not all of you know what they are. I mean, that's the part of the problem. When we speak really difficult language, complex language. So the point is, it needs to be synergetic, but we need social steering that it goes in the right direction. There is no guarantee that this is going to go in the right direction. Just think of the digital revolution. Many technologies are combining. There are niche innovations right now. I've been using AI quite a lot. But, you have to be very careful. Lots of stuff is really wrong there because it's trying to please you, not just convey evidence-based information. So there is a potential convergence of all of those systems that could be really revolutionary, deep transition, but also combination with the systems that we have otherwise. Think of education and so on. Think of privacy, communication, and et cetera, et cetera. The point I would try to make, though, is that the opportunity is big, because it's easy to talk about problems. And again, this is based on the work of my colleagues. In the center, you see a cross-section of analog and digital devices that we use for, or used to use for telecommunication, but perhaps you have some of those at home. They need about 550 watts of energy and 72 watts of standby on average. And if you look on the left, I'm sorry, I went too quickly, a smartphone, 30 years after the Motorola brick, uses 100 of the energy, 100. Just think about it. Even though AI uses too much energy and it's a big blockage. But not only that, about 25 times less materials and 25 times less embodied energy. So the opportunities are there. The opportunities are huge, but we have to make sure that we have the social steering that we go in the right direction. And this is yet another complex figure. That was part of the EDIT's work, but it goes very far in the deep past. The question is, how efficient are our systems? And on the top right, you have the energy, and Nuno in his introduction mentioned that. On the left is the primary energy. That's the energy that we extract from nature, like coal or wind power. And then that's converted to secondary carriers like electricity. That is then delivered to the consumers. That's the useful or final energy, and when that's used, that's useful energy. But the whole point of the system is to provide services. And the interesting fact is that one unit of energy saved in the services would save 7 units of energy on the primary side. And you look below, materials, not all that different. Irrigation, water, again similar, huge potential reductions by improving the end use. And then on top left, industrial processes, buildings, that's why Bauhaus is so important, even bigger savings, and transport, we all know that. In particular, for affluent people, transport is one of the most important parts of the energy use. So this illustrates that by improving the efficiency and adding sufficiency to it, in my language at least, we would reduce the dependency on the imports, we would reduce the dependency on the nature, and we would reduce the pressure on the planet. So I think that's the way forward. Again, much of what I've said is built on the work of my colleagues. I think this shows some of these disruptive changes that might be happening at the level of the services throughout our economy. You can see the icons that are in the blue, going from ownership to usership, that would provide both sufficiency and efficiency. But don't forget, most of us live in a capitalist system. Ownership is a fundamental part of our constitutions in most of our countries. So this is not all going to be easy, but it's an opportunity. Then the shared economy, perhaps a little bit easier to realize, and I think opportunities are huge. And the biggest opportunities are in the yellow examples from my point of view, and that's integrative. That's the systems that through new technologies can improve a lot. So going from silos, from the vertical, that is also required, not just in education, but in general, going to the horizontal system. So I think these are some of the fundamental transformations that may occur. Now, in conclusion, I have just 2 more slides. Let me show you, I think, a picture of the challenges of the digital age. On top, you have AI as agents, at the bottom as subjects, short-term, long-term. So let me just give you one example. Structural unemployment. It's already occurring. Now, people will argue that, yes, there will be new employments, and that's true, but that will not necessarily be the same people. So again, think about resistance to new technologies. Just from that point of view, many people will be left out. Then the horror of proliferation of autonomous weapons, Ukraine, Iran, Gaza, you mentioned it. This is where AI decides who lives and who dies, essentially. Just think about that in those terms. Then we have to ask ourselves, what will be the legal status of these systems? Not just in the warfare, self-steering automobiles, self-organized houses and so on. And then in the long run, I think we have to ask ourselves, and that's what I really worry about, what will be our future conceivably in a society that might be dominated by artificial intelligence. And then last but not least, What if these systems become sentient, if one day they become intelligent? And we will have the next revolution of abolishment of discrimination of AI in our societies. I think there is lots of things that one has to ask. So the challenges are huge, and at the end, let me just show you again by giving you pictures of technologies, but think about the broader social systems. On top you have the railways, then flying machines, telecommunication, individual mobility, and industrial processes. And I think you will agree with me that in the rhythm of about 50 years, long waves or great surges called in the literature, these systems have changed fundamentally. But the point in conclusion I'd like to make, it's not just the horizontal, it's the vertical. That all of those things need to mash together into new systems, new behaviors, new legal arrangements, and so on. And so who knows what 2050 will bring? I hope it'll be something like this. These are examples of sustainable systems, who knows, and sustainable behaviors. We don't know, and so I would argue this is a transformation. If we achieve in the next phase sustainable future for all, then it will be a transition, so that would be very good news. So thank you very much, and for all of that, we need to support science.
Thank you very much, Naki. Now we're going to 20 minutes part of questions. We have a technical thing here. I will ask everyone with questions to come and raise the question in the micro. So please come to this micro and to the other micro, because we cannot go with the micros to the other part. There's an issue, a technical this way. Social technical. Yeah. So I would just ask, because we have many questions, I would ask to make short questions.
Okay, thanks a lot. Very inspiring talk. So techno-economic modeling has generated significant knowledge over many decades about the diffusion of innovations and new technological systems. You've started the talk and you've alluded to many times that existing established systems don't simply die off,
yeah.
Okay, or die out. There's resistance, sailing ship effect, and lock-ins. We know all of that. My question to the community that you represent is, what kind of knowledge can techno-economic modeling bring forward, develop about specifically destabilization and phase-out processes, dynamics, timescales?
Well, one more.
Okay, thank you, Naki, for the presentation. I think most of us can sign up to what you have said, definitely. My question is to this science policy interface dilemma. I mean, what you presented as a scientist, you cannot find it then in the policy papers. I have been involved in the APCC assessment report on transformation pathways, and basically none of it is in there. So how do you deal yourself personally and giving advice with this matter?
Okay. So, shall I respond now? Okay. Well, first to the first question, I don't pretend I have an answer to that question. I think, some people call that $1,000,000 questions. If you had an answer, you could change the world. But, my trivial response would be, it has to be the next generation. I have seen that among my students at the university. The new behaviors are different. I think that can be the revolutionary deep transition to something new. But I'm a little bit afraid what happens when my students, upon the time, what happens now, 20 years later or 10 years later when they form a family, do we drop into the standard behaviors? But in any case, I think it's the young people are like the niche innovations, in my view. I think this is where the change needs to come bottom up. But at the same time, to give a more serious answer, I think it is essential that we have a kind of an inclusive process. I think the trouble now is in the power structures. The old blocks the new. It's not just the systems. It's not just the steam that blocks, whatever comes next, diesel electric engines, but it's the power structure. It's the interest. I mean, sometimes I wonder, you know, with this deep crisis and tragedy in the world of so many people being killed, whether, you know, that's not related more to the power structure and that some of the part of our system wants to develop weapons because you earn lots of money in the weapons. There are no economic constraints on that. So it's not an answer to your question, but I think it needs to be kind of a social movement, and I'm happy to see that the transition community is growing and is very large. Maybe that's part of that. I think the message has to be spread around, and that's connected to your question. You know, I also participated in IPCC from the beginning. I was in the first assessment report to the fifth, and in particular the scenario work. But last 5 years, I was the chief scientific advisor to the European Commission. So that was an exceedingly valuable experience. But to be perfectly honest, I'm also happy I rotated off in May after 5 years, despite the fact that it was rewarding. But it's related to your question in some sense. You know, the way the science advisory mechanism works in the Commission, I'll just spend half a minute on explaining that, is there are basically 3 groups. There are 7 chief scientific advisors. There is a consortium of European academies called SAPEA, and then there is, of course, a unit at the Commission. And then the College of Commissioners, together with us, with the advisors, decides what would be important questions. The next one, on which advice will be provided by successor colleagues, will be on the critical materials. Last year we did one on AI in science. That was, I think, really, really important piece of work. The last one that I co-led that I'm not very proud of, if I may admit it that way, but from policy point of view important, the solar radiation management. This is, I think, a scary technology from my point of view, but many are pushing it. So again, is that a niche innovation that we want to talk about? Don't know. So this is why social steering is important. And the point is that these questions are identified, then the SAPEA does a scientific evidence report, like a small IPCC, and based on that, we do what you, I think, you have indicated would be required. We try to simplify it. We usually have 5 recommendations that, you know, cabinets can look into the detail. Our report then summarizes them in a little bit more detail, but up front are just 2 pages with the major recommendations that we hope also all of the commissioners, and many of the things have been applied. For example, the idea that for AI, we need something like a CERN in Europe, because Europe is behind China and is also definitely behind US. So that's my brief response.
Okay, thank you very much, Naki. So are there more questions? We still have one round.
Hey, thank you so much. My question is around, we have seen many hopeful policies in Europe in the last years, but now we actually see a big backlash, right? The omnibus slashing and going with the Mo-Lorna across all these regulations, right? Clean Claims Directive being maybe revoked, CSRD being very weakened. And what I understand also, this has been happening a lot without actually expert consulting from the scientific community. So maybe you have some insights, what happened there? And then the second question, what can we actually do, right? You're advocating for also us academics to be a little bit activists. What can the scientific community do right now that these policies are not insanely weakened and, yeah.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. I have a question. What is the role of indigenous people and the non-humans or more than humans in just and sustainable planet and in facing crisis? Thank you.
Can you just repeat that? Non-humans, you said?
Non-humans or other than humans
okay.
in just and sustainable planets and for facing crisis. Thank you.
So the first one, let's take them one by other. The first one is tough. By the way, this is from the March of Science, and I have a collection of posters from the March of Science. I think they really indicate somehow what we really need to do as a scientific community. And I would argue that there are 2 sides to this. One is the evidence-based work, which is absolutely essential. Otherwise, we discredit ourselves. The second one is an interpretation for the policy. And I think there, you know, I use that metaphor of stylized facts. I think it needs to be simplified, it needs to be clear, and the most important, in my view, is how do we deal with the uncertainty? I remember very well Bert Bolin, who was the founding chair of the IPCC, who would always, coach us how to do the assessment. And one of the refrains I remember always is, if you imagine the scientific community, it looks like a bell function. In details, we strongly disagree, and you have a huge majority in the middle that kind of agrees. Maybe that's the transition community in the middle, and then you have the tails. The question is, how can you communicate that where there is knowledge is relatively certain in the middle and not exclude the tails of the distribution? So both are important. And I think this is really the tough part of the scientific advice. I think we have seen that in the COVID crisis, that scientists did not speak with one language. There was lots of controversies, and I think that communicates the spirit that's spreading through the world that science is just another form of knowledge. I would argue against that. I think what distinguishes science is the peer review process. That's fundamentally different than other forms of knowledge. But at the same time, I think we have to find out how to deal with this thing. So controversy, falsification of hypotheses is the basic principle in science, and yet when we provide advice based on that, I think that has to be much more crystal clear and not so controversial without forgetting the tails. This is a tall order, but that's how I would see it. So I think this is something that we need to overcome, and I think transitions community should also work in that direction, that the message comes across very crystal clear without forgetting the fact that there is lots of disagreement, and we have tried to do that in the policy advice in the European Commission. Now, if I understood the second question correctly, it has to do, I think, with the artificial agents. Is that, I don't know whether I got that right. I think we see that, just think about the mobile phone and the laptop. Most of us cannot live without it anymore. You always feel paralyzed. My main laptop crashed 6 weeks ago, and it was dire straits, and it still is. I still didn't restore everything, even though I do backups all the time. The point is that these machines, or whatever you want to call them, are part of us. And, I remember very well, let me just give you an example. I started my career, you will not believe, well, career is the wrong word, but I started my professional life working in the nuclear facility in Germany on experimental fast reactor. And my boss at that time, he said, oh, you guys are using computers and models. I did all of this on my slide rule. And so this is how the world changes. And who of you can, I think many of you use differential equations, but how many people know the central limit? There is something that one can call trivialization of knowledge. And I think that's what we have now. We are in this kind of phase transition. So we don't need to know everything. I've noticed among some of my students, this is kind of a side remark, but very proficient at tables, at looking at the cells, relationships with the cells, but that doesn't mean that you have a feeling for the numbers. Maybe that's not required, Maybe the AI will provide that feeling somehow. But the nature of knowledge, in my view, changes. Together, the way the society changes, the way our communication has changed. So that's why I'm a little bit worried of what the role of artificial agents will be. I continue to be surprised how well some of the AI programs actually communicate with the user, and how easy it is to mistake an error in AI that's trying to please you compared to the evidence in the AI. But I still find it very, very useful. I consult AI all the time, and if you know the subject, then it's easy to discount what's wrong. On the other hand, there is a type 2 error that I would make. I would forget many of the things that AI lists that are important. So there are these two sides to it.
Thank you very much, Naki. Thank you very much. Now, let's end this session. We're going for lunch. Lunch is served in the Olives Park or Olives Garden, just across the street here. You will see with the tents, the white tents. And we resume at 1:30. But in the meanwhile, There will be a poster session here at 1. If you are interested in the poster session, it's just, here in the next door. Thank you very much.
You never know how understandable and how relevant the situation is.